So in the beginning of this year, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. And if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you may have noticed that we stopped publishing videos altogether for months now. We used to be really regular, and we kind of went radio silent overnight. And in case you're wondering, that's why. A lot of people wrote in and messaged and asked, what's going on? Are you guys okay? Are you okay? Why did you stop making videos? This is why. So I just wanted to come on and first of all, thank everybody for the concern and the messages and explain exactly what's been going on and justify why we've been completely off the radar. But more than that, I wanted to make a video sharing a little bit of what our experience has been going through this, because it's been so life-changing these last few months that I figure this has to help somebody. Either people who have already gone through a similar experience and are having trouble maybe processing everything that happened, or people that will still in the future go through something like this, either with a friend or a family member or with themselves. Because unfortunately, this is part of life, disease and aging and life and death. So I thought I'd come on and share a little bit, very candidly, very transparent. Probably not a lot of jokes today. It's going to be a very different video if you're used to what we normally produce and publish. But I'm going to go through a little bit of what the last couple of months have been in our lives. Her specific diagnosis was squamous cell carcinoma. That's the technical name. And the type of cancer that she had is not common in the general population. She has a kidney transplant, so she receives immunosuppressant medication that inhibits her immune system to prevent rejecting the transplant, right? And so it's in that subpopulation that this specific type of cancer is more prevalent. And so it was a squamous cell carcinoma of the lower GI. And when we initially received the diagnosis, we weren't, we were optimistic about it. The prognosis was quite good, 90-something% remission rate. It's never an easy diagnosis. It's not easy to read on a piece of paper or on a screen that a carcinoma has been diagnosed. But, considering the circumstances, we were optimistic about it. We talked to many of our colleagues and started going through the program, chemo and radiotherapy. And the way it was structured was 8 weeks of radiotherapy sessions daily, Monday through Friday. And then in the first and last week, she would also do chemo. Radiotherapy, for those who haven't been exposed to that, basically you lie on a stretcher and there's a machine that's either hovering over you or turning around you. It doesn't hurt, you don't feel anything, it's pretty quick. And chemotherapy, generally you have chemicals injected into your bloodstream. So she had a little chamber implanted under her skin in her chest region. And then during that first week, when we were starting to go through the program, she had basically a needle going into her skin and into that chamber, connected to a little catheter, and then she was wearing a little device, a little injection device around her waist. And basically what that does is it continuously, throughout that first week, continuously pumps the chemotherapy drugs into her bloodstream. That first week went okay. She was uncomfortable. The needle was bothering her. She couldn't sleep very well. But all things considered, it was all right. We went to the medical center every day, went through the program. We were doing the countdown. Okay, 1 day down, 37 to go, or whatever it was. And so every day we were just kind of pumping each other to go through this whole thing. We got to the end of the first week. They finally removed the needle. She was happy about it. But then over the weekend, she started getting sicker and sicker. No energy. She was just lying in bed, nauseous all the time. She wasn't hungry. And then every day she would get a little bit worse, a little bit worse. We started having to wheel her in. The second week of treatments for radiotherapy, we had to take her on a wheelchair. And she was really no energy. Her skin was pale. The doctors even noted her Her state had really, really crashed quickly, and they were a little bit worried about that. But, you know, we just kept trucking along. But she just kept getting worse and worse and worse, to the point where after that second week, she was just lying in bed all day, didn't talk, didn't move, didn't want to eat at all. Her mucosal tissues were breaking down. Her entire mouth turned pitch black. Her lips, her gums, her tongue, everything. And she had excruciating pain. She couldn't hold a single piece of food inside her mouth. We tried liquid foods. We tried, you know, smoothies and soups and everything you can imagine. But it was still too painful for her to even hold the food. The contact of the food with the mouth was too painful. So she wasn't eating. And she was just losing energy and weight and muscle and just disintegrating in front of us day by day, night by night. We ended up devising a system where we got this syringe, and we would grind her meals and take up the food into the syringe and then try to inject whatever amount we could into the very back of her mouth. So we would ask her to open her mouth and put the syringe like in the back of the mouth and be able to inject little by little small amounts of food. I mean, we were probably getting, I don't know, 500-600 calories a day, probably not much more than that. Getting her to drink water was difficult. The medications, she had so many meds she was on. We had to grind every single pill, dilute in water, and then inject in the back of her mouth for her to be able to swallow. So, I mean, it was excruciating for her and for us to go through this process. We were just basically trying to keep her alive. And at the end of that second week, they did some blood work on her, and it was horrific. Her white blood cells were on the ground. Her kidney function was shot. And they said, you have to bring her in. We have to admit her immediately. So my sister and I got her out of bed somehow, got her dressed, and I basically walked her. She was no longer able to walk by herself. The way we did it was almost like we were dancing. I would kind of hold her and walk backwards and kind of almost like move her so that her feet would shuffle forward. And we were able to get all the way to the elevator like that. She was kind of panicking a little bit. She didn't know what was happening. She was disoriented. She would hold on to furniture and not allow me to move her. We eventually were able to get her all the way to the elevator and downstairs. And as we're leaving the building, her legs gave out and she just collapsed. She had no more. She didn't have an iota of energy inside in her anymore. And for the first time in my life, I had to carry my mother in my arms and get her in the car. And my sister and I drove to the medical center. It was torrential rain. We had all the lights of the car on and driving as fast as we could. It was one of the most stressful moments of my life. We didn't know, if we were going to make it, what kind of condition she was on. And we finally got there. To make matters worse, this was the peak of COVID. This was in March. Here, my mother is based in Portugal, where COVID was just completely out of control, and the country was in a national lockdown. They were not messing around. So we got to the door of the medical center. The nurses came down from the ICU with a wheelchair, put her on it. We didn't even make it past the door. Like, no visitors allowed. Nobody can get in. They wheeled her off, gave us a business card, and said, call tomorrow. Like, nobody allowed. Closed the doors. That was it. Our mother was wheeled off to the ICU. We went home, and we didn't know if we were going to see her again, what was going to happen after that. Now, as luck would have it, the doctor running the ICU was a former classmate of mine in medical school. Portugal is a small country. We often complain about that, but it has its advantages. And the medical community is small, and everybody pretty much knows each other. And it was one of those serendipitous things. I was a couple weeks earlier, I was going to a medical appointment with my mother, and we were sitting in the waiting room, and I hear somebody calling my name, and I turn around, and it's this former classmate of mine that I hadn't seen in 20 years. But he recognized me, and I immediately recognized him, and we chatted for a few minutes, and he said, "Oh, here's my number, you know, if you need anything, call me." Funny enough, he was the first person I met in medical school the first day when I walked in as an 18-year-old. Two kids basically, you know, joking around, hitting on girls, whatever, just enjoying our adolescence and starting to learn about medicine and starting to get into college and working on a medical degree. And fast forward 20 years, and he would go on to save my mother's life not once, but twice. So long story short, she was in septic shock. And sepsis is when you have an infection that spreads to your bloodstream. The microorganisms, the bacteria, get into your bloodstream and basically go everywhere. And septic shock is life-threatening. And after a few days, about a week or so, she was unresponsive. Like they weren't even able to communicate with her. She wouldn't cooperate with anything, and they were getting worried. And so he applied some pressure. He pulled some strings, and the administration of the medical center made an exception. There were normally no visits, especially to the ICU, but they made an exception, and they allowed me to go and visit, in the hope that seeing me would make her come alive a little bit and would allow them to communicate a little bit better with her. When I first walked in, she was unrecognizable. It had only been a week since I had seen her, but she was bloated, pale, completely unresponsive, eyes closed, nothing I did. I talked to her, I grabbed her hand, I tried to tell her I'm here, but she didn't hear me. She never knew I was there. Little by little, she was able to turn things around. She started to get better. She started to get more oriented. Her systems, her blood work, everything started to slowly drift into place. And after a long period in the hospital, she was transferred to another hospital, and it was about a month total. She was released, and she came home. So she had survived the septic shock, and her kidney had made it, which was another fear we had, that the kidney might not make it through all of this, that she might lose her transplant. But the kidney recovered. Her renal function went back to normal. So that was a huge sigh of relief. She was back. But remember, she still has cancer. We were just 2 weeks into the program when we had to interrupt it for a month, because basically her life was teetering on the line. So now we had to go back to the program and start things all over again. We have to reinitiate the radiation and do it quick, because the fear was that 1 month gap would compromise the whole program, and the rate of remission of the cancer, the odds of success would go down. So they restarted the radiotherapy as early as they could until she finally concluded the whole treatment. And we thought, all right, the worst is behind us. The treatment is done. Now we just need to hear the result. Did it work or not? But as far as our investment and the suffering that she went through, we're past. We've crossed the desert, and the worst is far behind us. But we couldn't have been any more wrong about that. Soon after she concluded the radiation sessions, she started feeling this burning pain in her perineum, in her pelvis, in all of those regions that had been irradiated. And the pain just got worse and worse and worse, to the point where she couldn't, again, she was kind of bedridden. She was in pain all day. She couldn't move. She had no appetite. She started doing medication, painkillers. We went up the ladder all the way up to all the opioids and through all the classes of opioids over the ensuing months. She's now done everything. She's been on morphine. She's been on buprenorphine. She's been on fentanyl. And this is a woman who has given birth to 4 kids, no anesthesia, old school. And she's told me that she'd rather give birth to another 100 kids without anesthesia than go through the pain that she went through. She describes it as a burning pain, almost like your insides are on fire and continuous. Not 10 seconds, but 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, sometimes hours, until you can control it, until you can do something about it. So 3 months go by after the end of the treatment, the radiotherapy, and we take her in to do full imaging, CAT scans, MRIs, PET scans, so a full set of imaging to see basically the verdict, what happened to the tumor. And a few days later, I get a call from the doctor, and the tumor's gone. They can't see a single thing on the scans. She appears to be in complete remission, and they are even kind of floored by how effective it was. Nothing in the ganglia, nothing in the tissues where it used to be, comparing to the previous images. And so they're very pleased with this result, and it was a moment of enormous joy. But my mother is still in pain, and in fact, I went in and I told her this result, and she went, "That's good, but she's still in excruciating pain, and that's almost more important right now." So what happened was the radiotherapy was very effective at burning out the cancer cells. But the problem is it's not selective, and it also burned the surrounding tissue. And so she had enormous destruction to her healthy tissue in that part of her colon, ulcerations, necrosis. It was just a mess, and that's where the pain was coming from. And then inflammation on top of that because of all that destruction. And so it's kind of a two-edged knife. The treatment is very aggressive, and it kills the tumor cells, but it also attacks everything around it. And that's kind of what oncology still is to this day, is you're trying to kill the tumor and ideally not kill the patient at the same time, but it doesn't always succeed. So we continued trying to take care of her, trying to keep her as comfortable as possible, as healthy as possible, day after day, week after week, month after month. By now you understand why I haven't been publishing videos, right? And long story short, we had 1,000 scares, 1,000 issues with her health. I'm not gonna, spend 3 hours of your day going through every little thing. But a couple months ago, she was again very frail, no appetite, very sleepy, kind of disoriented, and we had to bring her into the hospital again, and she was in sepsis again. So again, another infection that had spread throughout her tissues, throughout her body. Same ICU, same genius former classmate of mine and good friend that took her in again. And this time, because it was the second time, her body was so emaciated. She had lost, because of the no appetite and just the havoc that these bacteria had wreaked in her body. She was so thin. She was skin and bone. She lost every speck of fat and every speck of muscle in her body. You could see the bones in her shoulders. You could see the bones in her hands, in her legs. It was almost like those pictures of the prisoners of Auschwitz. It was kind of reminiscent of that. You could see the thigh bone and then widening at the joint of the knee, like a state of emaciation that she had never been in her life, and nobody in my family had never seen anybody like that. And again, we were told this is very serious. It's potentially terminal. We got that whole speech. They were so convinced that it was the end that they broke, again, every rule at the hospital. They allowed all 4 of her kids to come visit at the same time in the ICU, which is not allowed. but they let everybody in, basically in their mind, to say goodbye. 3 of my mom's 4 siblings, 4 kids, are medical doctors and scientists. So we understand her situation. We understand the gravity of her condition. And we said, look, we're going to do everything we can. We're going to take care of her the best that we can. And if it's not enough, then it's not enough. No regrets. We tried everything we could, you know. And I told this, one of the doctors was kind of trying to get us to step down and to back off of them and I get it, like, we're very intense, but she was trying to get us to accept that it was the end. And I told her, look, the day that my mom dies, I'll accept it, but don't ask me to give up before then, not a second before. And we talked to my mother about this. We've had very open conversations with her in the last couple of months. And we've asked her about, you know, death and life and things like that. And she's told me spontaneously, I'm not ready to die yet. I don't want to die yet. And so she hasn't given up. I'm sure as hell not going to give up on her, you know, until there's nothing we can do. She spent about a month in the hospital. Again, that whole period, very frail, and eventually was released. She came home just skin and bone, and we just started it all over again, feeding her as best we could, taking care of her, and trying to keep her as clean as possible, trying to avoid reinfections. Little by little, she has put on a lot of weight, a lot of mass. She has gained muscle back. She spent the last month and a half without being able to get up from bed alone. Little by little, every day, like a millimeter of victory, just being able to lift her, and she can hold herself up without too much propping. And only a couple days ago, she was able to get up from the bed and take a few steps around with no help, with no support. And she looks completely different from what she did 2 months ago in the hospital, in the ICU. She's gained back. You know, her face has plumped up again. Back then, I mean, everything was gone. You could almost see the shape of the teeth through her cheeks. That's how skinny she was. So she's looking normal, more normal again. And this is not and we lived happily ever after video. This is not the we beat all of these diseases video and we rock video. It's definitely not that, because her condition is still very complicated, very precarious. She's still in these cycles of infection every few weeks. All we've been able to do is build up her condition, her general condition, so that she's able to withstand these episodes. And in fact, she's in the hospital right now. She's been in the hospital for a couple of weeks. She had another bout of general infection, the 3rd one this year. But this time it wasn't as serious, as devastating as the previous ones. She recovered. She bounced pretty quickly within a couple of days once she started antibiotics. And so, yeah, this is not a we won story. It's just a candid story of everything we went through, and it's a real story. This is reality. Trying to deal with things and trying to do the best you can with the conditions you have. So the video is getting a little long. I just want to wrap up with a couple of things that stood out in my mind from all of this experience. One thing is the exhaustion and the weight that you feel. I mean, taking care of somebody who is completely incapacitated and 100% dependent on others is back-breaking work. It's devastating. I had no idea how difficult it was. The exhaustion, the physical exhaustion of not sleeping, of not eating properly, of walking back and forth and doing 100 laps around her bed all day long, and then not sleeping in another day like that, and it just starts to weigh on you so heavily. I didn't know it was possible to feel that tired. And so my advice to anybody going through that is get help. Get help early, because I waited. I did not want to have, I didn't want to hire anybody. I didn't want people to come and help. I wanted to, I thought I had to do everything myself. And part of it was, you know, I thought that I was going to be letting her down or betraying her in some way if somebody else was helping me out, because, you know, here's somebody who's given her life to give me life, right? And who has sacrificed herself every night and every day for whatever it was, 10, 15 years until we're independent. And now I can't do 10 months, 10 weeks to help her? Are you kidding me? So I felt like it was, you know, like it was my duty to do it, and it is, but you can get people to help. And the other thing is, I thought nobody was going to do the job the way I was doing it. Nobody was going to do it right and give her the attention and the love and the intensity that I was giving her. And that's not true either. You can hire people that are competent and that do a really good job, and you end up doing a better job yourself because you're not so devastated with exhaustion. And so your interaction with the person ends up being much higher quality, and even what you do is much better done. And it's better for everybody. Another mindset shift that really helped me was that for the first few months, I was going into this thinking, like, I got to do this. I got to make this sacrifice, right? I had a sacrifice mindset. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I have to be there every second of every day that she needs me, and I have to commit this sacrifice for her sake. And one day I realized it's not a sacrifice, it's a privilege. It really is. Like, I get to do this for my mom. I get to help her through the hardest times that she's ever had to face. We had to spoon feed her. We had to go through her relearning how to walk. And obviously this is an experience that the two of us have been through before, except the roles were reversed. And so the fact that I get to do this for my mom, that I get to be there, I get to help her out, is an incredible privilege. And my sisters have been incredibly helpful as well, incredibly present. But because of the conditions, because of my conditions in family-wise, professionally, I was the only one who had the right set of conditions to drop everything, every professional project, every aspect of my social life, everything that I was doing before, and just be there 100%. And so that's an incredible privilege. And I mean, I'll never forget all this time and all this difficulty that we went through. But it really is a privilege that I got to do it for her. How many people have the chance to, I don't want to say payback, because it sounds like you have a debt to your parents. That's not what I mean. You know what I mean. But you have the chance to help them a fraction of what they helped you. It's funny, you know how couples sometimes say, we're pregnant? And we know what that means. The woman's going to put up with all the pain and all the 99% of the work, and she's really going to shoulder everything. But we understand that when the man says we're pregnant, he's signaling that there's some empathy there, and he's going to help to the extent that he can. That's what this felt like. It felt like we had cancer. It felt like the family had cancer. Not that she had cancer and we were kind of helping out a little bit. It felt like the whole family was together going through that, and the bad and the good. When things were really bad, it was really shitty for everybody, and when we had improvement or little victory, everybody was elated. So, yeah, I guess in a way, and again, she shouldered 99.99% of it, but we had cancer. The other obvious takeaway from this is the brevity of life, right? We all know it, but we tend to forget it, how short life is and how things can turn upside down overnight sometimes. I mean, I was taking 30, 40-minute walks with my mom, and a couple weeks later, literally, she was bedridden, couldn't feed herself, couldn't clean herself. Yeah, like a couple weeks, maybe a month. And so things can come out of the left field and whack us when we least expect it. So for me, it's really distilled the importance of focusing on things that A, we enjoy doing, not wasting our time, and B, things that we think are important. Contributing something, doing something that's worth it, helping somebody, making these videos that I know I stopped putting out for months, but that's why this whole project started a couple of years ago, is this idea of providing scientific content and scientific knowledge to people who don't have direct access to it. And it's still my passion, and I will keep doing it actually more intensely than I was before, circumstances allowing. And I'll try to publish a video here and there. I don't promise that it's going to be weekly, because things here are far from resolved, and we're far from from having all of this put behind us. But I'm going to try to stay in touch. Please share if you've had similar experiences yourself or a family member. Please share them below. It might help somebody else. Thanks again for all the messages. They've been really encouraging, and I'll see you soon. Take care.